get that remaining 20%. So do you have enough state of charge for that to potentially be an issue for that battery? Yeah. So again, go back to the conversation of, does this need to be in use? Does this need to be charging? Hoboken, New Jersey, big warehouse fire. Double fatality. Shouldn't have been a double fatality. 2 people were living in this warehouse, even though they shouldn't have been. But that's what ended up happening. Area of origin, storage facility for a vape shop. Not only did they have disposable vapes, just like the one in Los Angeles I showed you, they had these light-up rolling trays. They didn't even know it was a thing. They light up. They come with a little lithium polymer battery right here. I should grab my pointing stick. I have a pointing stick because the laser pointer's not working. But that lithium polymer battery is located in these. After the fire, when we started pulling out these boxes, these rolling trays, as well as these like chalices, clear chalices that you drink out of, were all flashing all over the place because they were all sufficiently charged for the items to operate. So in our area of origin was a low burning spot localized that tunneled through a stack of boxes that happened to have a bunch of these things. So I just broke that thing apart right there. I didn't even really do anything to get that apart. So if I, crushed the rolling tray, I could crush that lithium polymer battery within it. So you may not even know that that's supposed to exist in a thing like a rolling tray. Rolling trays were what? Just a tray. Now it's a light-up rolling tray with a lithium polymer battery that's pre-charged from the manufacturer in it, stored in a box times 1,000. There's like 1,000 boxes of these. Vape mods. So vape pens, right? What are the guys doing? I don't know if you're a vapor. I'm not a vapor. I do smoke cigars, though, so if anybody wants to smoke a cigar with me later. But the vape mods, the guys are trying to get big clouds, right? So how do you do something like that? The vape itself is designed with a heating coil to heat up the oil or the juice that's located within it, and a battery that's rated for that use, right? If I want to make more clouds, what's one way I can do that? Perhaps I can put a higher wattage coil in, right? Get it hotter. Maybe I can do it for longer by putting a higher capacity battery in it. Are we now introducing third-party components? Yes. So what if my coil, which is a higher wattage now, and is going to drain my factory-installed battery faster? Is that a more rapid rate of discharge than it may be originally designed for? Yes. So what can happen in those scenarios? You can go into thermal runaway. So what if I have a vape which has a cylinder at the bottom with an 18650 within it and a mouthpiece with the juice and everything we talked about, and it fails while I'm vaping? Perhaps I can get the mouthpiece lodged into my sinus cavity and it kills me. That's kind of your worst case scenario. And that's what you're looking at there. That was the vape-related stuff that we've done. So then the conversation became with like, yeah, what if I have a lithium battery located in something I take on a plane? And we all know that nowadays there's a big conversation as to whether or not your battery-powered devices should be stored in the cargo compartment. They're not supposed to be. Whether or not you're taking it on board. So we were like, all right, yeah, you take it on board, but I can still have a problem on board, right? And there's fire ratings for overhead compartments. There's fire ratings for seat fabrics and such. So the question became, what would fire development and growth look like if I failed a lithium battery inside, let's say, a duffel bag like you can have taking on board? And will that fire kind of grow and spread, or will it self-extinguish? And that was kind of the basis of the testing. And you get a scenario like this. A lot of these videos have been either accelerated or trimmed just to kind of fit them in a time manner, but nonetheless, it kind of shows you the effects of what happens. And this is an example of the kind of real-world practical testing that we do to evaluate whether or not fire development and growth can be of a concern. So these things go long enough. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of smoke being produced in this scenario. We talked about the toxicity of some of that smoke. Some of the testing that we do this week will actually hopefully contribute to that analysis based on evaluating the contents of that smoke. Here's the same bag in an overhead compartment, So imagine you're chilling on your flight, you're sipping your cocktail, and this is occurring above your head. What are we going to do now, These are all possible things for consideration. And the fire growth is not, necessarily stopped once this gets going, and extinguishing techniques come into question, whether or not we're just using water, whether we're using foam, or whatever we're talking about. And that's part of what the research is aiming to do. What would be the most effective way of handling this situation in that environment? Notice the cells are going, and there's ejection of flame and stuff like that as each cell fails, and the fire is propagating and growing. So that was the same cells that you saw being used in the vape pen, and then we also did the same experiment with the little tiny LiPo battery from a drone. Is it possible that somebody's traveling with a LiPo battery that they've abused and used in their carry-on associated with their drone that they're planning on using at their destination? Sure. This is another project. So we've had a lot of conversation about the toxicity and the components involved. So one of our questions was, what are we dealing with as fire investigators? First of all, as a fire investigator or a firefighter, you shouldn't be licking fire debris. I'll throw that out there if you didn't know. That being said, if you do come in contact with fire debris because you're not wearing your PPE or you are wearing your PPE and you don't necessarily maintain it, we were like, what kind of components are we talking about that come off in the debris post-fire that you're interacting with? What is in the water runoff, right, when you're suppressing one of these fires that gets created? So we worked with the University of Texas. They have a fire research group, some phenomenal guys there. DK, he's a PhD there, way smart. I'm not smart by any means compared to anybody, but he's way up there. So if I have a question, I kind of contact him. They had the ability to do all this kind of testing and identify the components, inorganic and organic, in the post-fire debris, and they came across some of these things. Now, they analyzed various states of charge to see if that changed the concentration of this materials that we came across. So I'm going to talk about 100% state of charge because that's the most volatile state and also what we care about the most, but there was minimal change in the post-analysis contents in parts per million of each of the components identified depending on state of charge. You can see some of the items that are identified and their relative toxicity. A lot of these components are also associated with what you would expect based on the construction of a battery. And it may not be toxic in the functional state of a battery, but is it toxic in concentration once it's vaporized or once it's damn heated otherwise? One of the interesting things that we came across, they did SEM to analyze components. The electrolyte salt being used decomposes and produces hydrofluoric acid when mixed with water. Does anybody know what hydrofluoric acid is? Any Breaking Bad fans over here? So Breaking Bad, when they dissolved the people in the barrels, the acid that they were using was hydrofluoric acid. So obviously in sufficient concentration, it can be really bad stuff. Is that a consideration depending on the number of batteries you have involved in your fire and the amount of water you flow? You may come across a single scenario where it's a vape pen in a fire, like the dog situation. What if I told you there's fires out there with 200 plus tons of batteries burning and you're flowing master streams and you have water runoff? Is that water safe for you to be trekking around in and doing whatever you're doing? Maybe it's safe to do in, but has that now perhaps compromised the integrity of your PPE? These are kind of things we're looking at. So that's why when CTOD mentioned we're going to put swatches of turnout gear in our boxes, we're hoping to analyze them because if any of you participated in that FDNY symposium that we had, one of the battalion chiefs from Pittsburgh, I think it was, said that they had like a couple EV fires. They sent out their gear to be scrubbed and cleaned like we all normally do, and the vendors had no way of removing the etched heavy metal oxides that were on the actual gear, permanently etched. And that was also UL's interpretation of what happened. But it's interesting, that's a consideration. So what do we do about that? How do we deal with that? What cleaning techniques do we need to employ? Next project that we worked on, we said, all right, you got these 18650. We know that they can cause fires. Are they always causing fires in the location where they fail? Because we noticed, obviously, that flaming contents is being ejected. When that flaming contents is ejected, how far does it go? So what we did was we said, let's fail an 18650 on a hot plate, lay cheesecloth around in our large burn room, and see if we can characterize where these flaming particles land. There's some still shots. Doesn't give you perspective on the scale and the image, but you see that this emergency pull station metal box up there? That's like a shielded box that protects the life safety devices in the space at that exit point. That's about 60 feet away from the point of failure in the center of the large burn room where the podium is, right? It's landing on top of that. So the flaming canister shot 60 feet away and landed on that box, and it's continuing to flame. So if I had a suitable combustible there that wasn't a metal box, what do you think would happen? It's like a piloted ignition, right? Is 60 feet away in the area of origin where you found your failure point? Not necessarily. And if you found 2 points of origin 60 feet apart, what would you then be telling yourself as a fire investigator? You'd be saying, I clearly have multiple unconnected points of origin here. I'm getting prepared to put bracelets on somebody, right? Here's a video of that testing. So hot plate on the left, Thermal imaging on the right, because we can capture the hot components that are ejected, and then various angles of the cheesecloth. We use cheesecloth because cheesecloth is a fine fuel that we can also see the debris on pretty easily. And also, if we get ignition, we can kind of see it. What we saw in certain instances when the electrolyte got ejected, we had almost trailers. We had flaming little strips of fire from where the electrolyte dripped and stuff. But you can see hot plate getting hot. It vents. So the vent does its job. But notice the thermal imaging, where all those hot spots get ejected. So once again, are we causing fires where the point of failure occurs? Not necessarily. So you've now expanded your point of origin, area of origin, to perhaps your room of origin in this scenario where I know that there's lithium batteries for consideration in fire investigation. There's a zoomed in. Hopefully you'll get some awesome energetic events like this when we do our live stream stuff. That's the goal. Make it a cool event, right? 478C, somebody was asking about temperatures. So 478C was the temperature at the hot plate when it caused failure. We have other tests that we're doing, including the testing that we're going to do here, where we have thermocouples attached to the individual cells where we're monitoring at what point does it vent consistently. And it's going to be above 200C where it starts to vent. A lot of times when we get the energetic rupture and failure, we're approaching 400C. This laptop failure, anybody seen this video? This is in England. This is a guy's office. He was notified about this fire because of the motion detection as a part of his intrusion alarm system. Intrusion alarm systems in fire investigation can be very useful because how does a passive infrared detector work? Looking at heat signatures for people coming through and stuff in the space. What also produces a heat signature? Hot gases, right? So that's how he was notified. But notice how you had the failure, and then now, and this is a charging laptop, and then you get the subsequent failure because there's multiple cells, right? What ends up happening then? See? You have the spot fire over there forming, right? So once again, we have multiple points of ignition from a failure of a device. So then we went from, all right, we got 18650s. What about in a pack scenario? How does that change the circumstances, right? Instead of having one 18650, does the debris characterization and spread of fire and stuff like that change when we take a bunch of them and put them together in the form of a pack? When we're talking about a pack, what are we talking about? Tool battery packs, right? We talked about modules within an electric vehicle. All we did in this case was do the same test, except this time we took one of the cells out and we put a cartridge heater in. And we allowed it to cause the adjacent cells to go into thermal runaway. This is data that's still being compiled for this as far as the videos and everything, but this is a battery pack, for example, that you may come across. This is, a unnamed, I'm not going to name the brand that you can read there, but, it's there. There's 18650s in it. You can see that there's 10 18650s inside of this pack. So if I have one of those that has an event that causes a failure because of what? Mechanical damage. Has anybody dropped a tool all in their hand? Yeah, it happens, right? And we'll talk about that. That's interesting because I have a case study for that. And it causes damage to one of these cells. Does it mean it's going to catastrophically fail at that point? No. Does it mean that it could potentially catastrophically fail later on? Yeah. Is it going to fail when it's being sent to the recycling plant via delivery vehicle after they dropped it off at a common drop-off point? Maybe. Here's one of those packs that we put into thermal runaway where we get ignition and then you can watch the observed failure. So sometimes, depending on the rate of failure of the packs and the batteries involved, you can get retention of the cells and you don't get ejection. Or if it happens fast enough, you can get ejection of the cells. So now you have the potential to eject cells in this scenario. So when you watch the videos that we do later on, when we did a test run yesterday, we got ejection of some cells. You might get ejection of cells in these packs that we run over the next couple of days. And I'll talk a little bit more about that test series once we get past this. But you'll see that we get some of those energetic releases that we were talking about. So consider this happening in an environment. Where are you going to find a tool pack like this? In a garage, right? Maybe it's your arsonist that's smart and make sure he throws a couple throwdown battery packs in the area of origin in the living room because then you can't eliminate them as a cause. I don't know. Now you got to be able to consider these. Anybody know about this Morris, Illinois fire? Yeah? Yep. So this started out as a localized fire on a pallet at a lithium iron phosphate recycling plant. So the story behind this is I got a call at, the early AM hours and they're like, hey. I'm like, hey, it's early AM. What's going on? They're like, we got a fire. I was like, oh, that's great. Is it still burning? They're like, yeah. Oh, that's cool. You want to call me back later on when it's out? Because it's like 0700 right now, So Long story short, they're like, we got a bunch of lithium batteries burning at a recycling plant. Problem was, nobody knew it was a lithium battery recycling facility. This is an abandoned paper mill. And when the fire department showed up, they came across this, and the chief saw a pallet of lithium batteries in the disassembled format burning. And his analysis initially was lithium in its metallic form is water reactive. That's true. Just like magnesium and potassium and stuff like that, in the metallic solid state, you put it in water, you get a nice spark show and fire. Salts dissolved in electrolyte and stuff like that doesn't exactly react the same way. So rather than continuing to apply water and stop this small fire from becoming a big fire, they pulled out and stopped, and it became a massive fire. They ended up realizing that they had in excess of 200 tons of stored lithium iron phosphate batteries. Their first attempt to extinguish it was to request 1,000 pounds of purple K. Everybody knows what purple K is, right? Didn't do anything. He quote unquote, he said the fire laughed at them. They ended up evacuating 1,000 plus homes and businesses in the area. The EPA at the time came out doing air monitoring and said, yeah, everything's good, no problems. That's one of those situations, though, if you are monitoring for 4 gases and it's not any of the 4 gases, everything's good, right? So now there's one of those EPA Superfund sites for this fire. If you're interested, you can go and look. So I don't know what that's going to mean for all of the people that were in the area of this fire that burned for about 4 days. They ended up continuing to go to defensive operations, throwing enough water to basically put out what ended up being every available fuel burning in the place. Then they decided to dump 28 tons of dry Portland cement on it to smother it, which was effective at that point, but you've already also drowned it with 4 days worth of master streams flowing. So I don't know which one was what helped there. But that's a scenario that can happen over here. Here's what a lithium iron phosphate battery is. So there's various chemistries for lithium ion batteries. Iron phosphate, considered the deep cycle family of lithium batteries. This is what you're using in like your solar energy storage systems, your RVs. So there's RVs and stuff these days that aren't coming with onboard generators because a smaller RV can run off of a bank of lithium iron phosphate deep cycle lithium batteries and keep it running for 1 week. And then when you start up your truck to tow your recreational camper, whatever it may be, you just top off the charge on this battery and you're good to go. So I don't have to hear my generator droning in the background. And all those little mini camper vans that you see and everything, people are putting those battery systems in them. It's going to be a bunch of lithium iron phosphate batteries that you're going to come across. Here's a elemental lithium put in water. Yeah, it is reactive, but does that mean that you should not flow water when you come across one of these fires? No, you'll see that a lot of the manufacturers, the first thing that they'll recommend is flow copious amounts of water to cool, not necessarily the lithium battery or cell that's actually burning at that time, but to do what? Cool the adjacent cells to prevent propagation and furtherance of the event. It's a nail salon in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you guys can see in this image. There's a bunch of light spots that are lit up. See right over here, this is you can see the time of day. This is 3 a.m., right? So see that blue spot right there. See this spot right here. Anybody know what these things are? Anybody here get their nails done on a regular basis that knows what these are? Nobody? I didn't know what these were, but that's just me. You may. So I'm like, they're like, yeah, we had a fire in a nail salon at 3 a.m. I was like, huh, that's interesting. That's the time when a lot of these fires occur for businesses that are doing poorly, right? You know, when nobody's supposed to be there and things of that nature. That being said, this is the video that they got. The heck happened over there? It's just one of the nail salon stations. Something on the tabletop failed and started a fire. Not only did this fire start, but what do you see all there? Rolling chairs, right? Vinyl wrapped, leather wrapped chairs. You think that would be nice if you had something flaming land on it to continue the fire growth? Yeah. So what were those things? Those were UV nail lamps. They have lithium batteries in them because if you want to go out on your back deck with a mimosa and dry your gel nails, you put your hands under these things and it does it. But they need to be charged, and in a situation where they're on those tabletops, they're continuously plugged in and just sitting there charging. And that's all those different spots that you were seeing were one of those with a lithium battery. So for whatever reason, can one of those lithium batteries have a failure resulting in fire causation? The answer to that is yes, because you saw it happen on video. But would you know to look for a lithium-powered device via a UV nail lamp in one of these scenarios? So lithium-powered battery banks, right? We all have them in our situation currently. you come across a tabletop where you have a battery pack. You can see inside these, there's a couple cylindrical cells. This would be what I would consider localized damage. So even though it's fire impinged upon, there's a small part of it, which happens to coincide with the intersection with where the cells kind of made up on the inside. And we talked about the caps doing their job and where the ejection occurs. You think a failure could have resulted in the type of damage that we're seeing here on this tabletop? Yeah. This was in North Carolina, by the way. And I got sent these images. They're like, hey, what do you think's going on here? And it's like, oh, well, that looks pretty good. Ironically, that same weekend, same exact battery pack in Camden, New Jersey. So are there recalls for these battery packs? Yes, there are. But does that mean everybody's automatically aware of them and complies with them? No. But two localized events in the same kind of spot with the same battery pack resulting in a fire. Were these fire catastrophic events that flashed over a room and burned down an entire house? No. But obviously they caused sufficient damage to be an issue. Salem, Oregon, double fatal. So this is in Oregon, and we happen to have a special guest in the audience that's from Oregon, and she's the certified fire investigator. I could probably have her give a little bit more details about this case, but what we're going to do is first just watch this quick clip here. You know, watch around here in this. See that flash right there that occurred? You know, that's interesting. So what could be happening in that scenario? There's obviously a lot of things that you can consider. That could be a result of a lot of failures, obviously of fire growth and stuff like that. Two of the things that were in this area of origin, this was actually a double fatal fire, were two electric scooters that were charging at the time. So do you need to consider those as a fire investigator? The answer to that is yes. And she submitted them for analysis by the Fire Research Laboratory. One of our engineers, you know, using X-ray imaging and visual examination, was able to, you know, take a look at them and see if they had a contributing factor. Cindy, you want to mention anything about this case, just to give the audience a little bit more background so they can know about what's going on? It's probably worthwhile to hear how you got involved. Yeah. Yeah, so why don't you come up here so I don't got to turn around?
I was kind of told I was talking about this, so nothing's prepared.
Use the mic for the live stream.
Oh, there you go.
Is that better? Okay. Yeah, Salem, Oregon, fire department reached out to us. Unfortunately, there was no insurance involved because it was a squatter's house, so no interested parties. Otherwise, we would have left it to the insurance company. But submitted it to us, 2 fatalities. It was a room and contents, which was kind of odd. So it basically snuffed itself out. They watched hours of video. You see that bright flash, and I think it was like an hour or 2 later is when dogs start barking and it gets called in. But male and female deceased, 2 of these charging. Again, squatter's house. They were in the downstairs master bedroom. No one else is in sight. Everyone else, you know, beat feet at that time. So we didn't know what happened. There was a hole kind of in the area where these were charging. One of them was plugged into an RPT that ran across the room. Electrical engineers didn't find any, you know, electrical evidence, no arcing, nothing on the submitted mass of wires they submitted. But I think one of the scooters had like a bulging battery pack, so that could not be eliminated. The other one was too badly damaged. You guys couldn't pull out the batteries. But yeah.
So I mean, it's something. Thank you. Sure. It's something that needs to be considered on your. So obviously, it has to be considered in your fire investigation scenarios. And there was 2 scooters here. Obviously, they had differing levels of damage. One of the things is, once you get to a fire at a certain point where you've damaged the entire battery and its contents, it's very difficult to tell what's going on. But a lot of times, you can see things like in the other one where there's a bulging battery. Now, if you see a bulging battery, depending on the circumstance, what does that mean to you? It could be impingement, right? I mean, I could just have that sit through a fire and bulge, ultimately. I can be bulging. How many of you have had some sort of device that you own, laptop, cell phone, that starts to bulge, right? That's that electrolyte starting to produce gas and bulge the battery. So we're leading to the point of failure. So considering these types of things in your analysis is important. Oh, sorry, I was looking for my clicker. Electric vehicle fires. So take a look at this video. A lot of the issues that we're talking about are scalable to electric vehicles. So this vehicle is obviously charging, it's plugged in. So when you're charging, it's kind of like something that's electrical under load, right? Failures can occur when something is energized, but not necessarily if it's not in use. But it can happen when it's not in use. But if it's under load, under demand, or charging, or it's being, generating more heat, there's a potential for something to occur. So we got a lot of that off-gassing that we talked about when the battery starts to fail. Get the audible effects, right? A lot of times you come to one of these fires and people will say, I heard something pop. I heard something like a jet taking off. You see all this fire impinging on the conductors and stuff like that? What do you think is going to happen to the conductors there at that point eventually, right? They get severed. Maybe some evidence of a localized event, who knows? What about adjacent exposures, right? What about that truck sitting next to it? Now, watch that truck also. It's currently parked. Perhaps it has its parking brake on. Perhaps that parking brake is a cable-based system in a small truck like that. What do you think ends up happening eventually once that gets compromised? Your bad day becomes a worse day because now you have a rolling fireball. Again, look at the smoke plume being produced, some of the toxic stuff we're talking about. There goes your truck. Who would have thought to shot that truck at that point in time, Yeah. Yeah. So those are connected to line voltage for vehicles and stuff like that. However, we've had fires where there's electric scooter charging stations which use long-term deep cycle storage batteries. We had one in Maryland at a mall where the scooter company installed a charging station, which is basically like a little kiosk looking thing, and it had a bunch of deep cycle lithium ion batteries in it, which failed and caused a fire inside of a mall. And it was a charging point for other battery banks. In Asia, what's is rather than having a charging station for smaller vehicles and electric scooters, you have battery swap stations. So you have a bunch of batteries being charged, and you show up, you pull your old battery out, you put it in the charging station, you pull a new fresh charged battery in, plug it into your vehicle. So now you have batteries stored at those locations to consider beyond just a line voltage charger without a battery. Electric vehicle consideration. So all this text, I'm not a big text person, but I just put these up there because these are from Tesla's vehicle guides. Some of the key things that they mention can take between 3,000 to 8,000 gallons of water applied directly to the battery to fully extinguish and cool down a fire battery. So let's talk about an electric vehicle. Where's the battery located? Remember that vehicle diagram we showed? Within the chassis, within a pack, in the base of the vehicle. You come across a vehicle fire and you start extinguishing it with your hand line, regardless of the type of extinguishing agent you're using, foam, whatever it may be. Are you applying the water to the actual battery that's heating, going into thermal runaway, or doing any of that? No. That's where perhaps, the Rosenbauer tool and everything that's going to be evaluated provides you access to that location. But think about the nature of how these are designed. They're in metallic housings to help contain the event. So unless you pierce that container or it's ruptured and it's exposed and you're applying water directly to a partially flipped over vehicle, how are you exactly cooling it down? So what ends up happening? The fire just continues to propagate to adjacent cells and continues to burn for a prolonged duration. An EV fire is not necessarily different than a regular common vehicle fire as far as the peak heat release rate and all that kind of stuff. Problem is, if you're not able to extinguish it and it becomes a prolonged event, the total heat release might be the same, but instead of your curve being a peak like this with a shorter time frame, maybe it's a longer duration. So are you now prepared to handle a longer duration event? Let's say that EV fails inside of a tunnel. I don't know if you have tunnels in consideration in your jurisdiction. We have another test cycle coming up that we're working with some people on to consider the impact of electric vehicle fires in the tunnel environment for existing ventilation systems, suppression systems, and suppression tactics used by agencies such as the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We got the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel right there by me, It's already a pain in the ass when a vehicle fire. It's a pain in the ass when somebody just breaks down in the thing. You've screwed up traffic for the next 12 hours, let alone now if there's EV fire that we're not sure how we're going to exactly handle, because is it advisable to move a fully involved electric vehicle fire when it's ejecting cells as you're moving it along, you know? That's where things such as the blanket may come into play. We considered the blanket, put the blanket on it. It may not extinguish the fire, but at least it'll contain it while we can now get the vehicle out. These are kind of tactics that are developing and being discussed. We talked about apply water directly to if safety permits. So you have an active vehicle fire with some of the effects that we saw in some of these videos. Which one of you is sending one of your guys down there to position an airbag or do something to roll this thing on the side? Everybody raise their hand. Who's the line officer that's going to do that? Yeah. But it's in the guide, though. So go ahead and take that into consideration. They don't recommend placing vehicles in a large container full of water, which is interesting because I'll show you some stuff that people do, and it seems to be somewhat effective. I don't know. Using a tick to monitor it, yeah. We're going to have, during our experiments here, just like in the experiments I showed you, we're going to have thermal imaging on the battery packs and stuff. We're going to be quenching the batteries to see if we can mitigate them going into thermal runaway with various mediums, such as water mixed with sodium bicarbonate, mineral oil, and we're going to use thermal imaging to see if they're cooled down or not. So is that an effective way of doing it? Yeah. We're also going to be instrumenting them with thermocouples, so that way we know the point temperature on these cells inside, and we'll be able to see that. They can take 24 hours to fully cool, and secondary responders. So you come to a electric vehicle fire, you put it out, everything's good. You're clapping, backs are being patted. You called the secondary or tertiary responder by way of the tow company. They tow this vehicle back to their tow yard. They say, it's a regular vehicle fire, it's already out. They put it next to a structure. 24 hours later, it reignites and burns down your structure. Am I talking about a hypothetical scenario? No, I'm talking about real life scenarios that have occurred on multiple bases across the country that we've been involved with. We had one that reignited 72 hours later. So is it advisable to be like, hey, tow company, we have this out right now, but it may be something that we need to consider after we've suppressed it, that it may reignite, maybe not put it up against your building. Perhaps they do because that's a good way of getting insurance money for a new building. But that's also a consideration now for you as an investigator. But keep that in mind. This is Belgium, BMW i8. You know what they're doing here? They're dunking that electric vehicle into a tank of water. Now, that's something that has proven effective, but notice this vehicle. Does that look like a fully involved electric vehicle fire? So do you think it would be easy to raise a fully involved vehicle fire with this apparatus the way they're doing it with this vehicle fire? No. That being said, here's what the apparatus looks like with the crane and the tank and the water. So all of you guys in charge of purchasing, make sure you make a request for one of these. Maybe that's the tactic in which we use to handle these vehicle situations. I don't know yet. We're figuring it out, right? Boston metro area. I got called. They said a Tesla caught fire. I was like, oh, all right, well, that happens. Why are you calling me? They're like, well, we're just trying to make sure the story's straight, because nobody's ever burned a vehicle for insurance money or anything like that. You know, why would somebody do something like that? In this case, a pull-out storage rack was being installed in the back of this Tesla, which requires drilling into the frame of the vehicle. And what they did was they punctured the floorboard in the area of what was there in the diagram we saw, the battery pack. And what do? You get a fire. So I'm like, they're like, does this story make sense, or is he bullshitting us? It's like, yeah, no, that can happen. And we have physical evidence for the location, a lot of corroborating information, but now you got to take this into consideration. Palo Alto, not a Tesla fire, not a Tesla vehicle. This is a Tesla maintenance facility, and what they had stored here, those are pallets of Tesla battery packs sitting outside in the nice California weather, Bay Area weather. And what ended up happening? One of them went into thermal runaway and burned. What's interesting about this is when they called me about this, and I'm looking at it and looking at some of the pictures of all the cells ejected and the damage on the batteries, I said, oh, was it contained to the area? They were like, yes, and thanks God. Why? Next to this Tesla repair facility, it's shared a lot with a McLaren dealership. Does everybody know what a McLaren is? We could have bankrupted Tesla just by the insurance claim being made by McLaren for the 100-plus McLarens that were on that lot that day. But pretty contained fire. Got a lot of awesome pictures of McLarens from there, though. I'm a car guy, so. Here's the BMW i3. We're going to have CTOD come up and talk about this. And what I'll do is I'll show you the pictures, though. This is an i3, fully electric BMW, right? Where's the battery pack located? On the bottom. This is the post-fire vehicle, all right? There are fire investigators in the world who will come up to me and say, I can look at this vehicle and tell you that the fire started right here. And I'm kind of like, you're better than I am, because that looks like a melted pile of aluminum and drive shafts. That's about it. That being said, we have some backstory which helps us figure out what happened here, and I'll let you see Todd tell you because it's his.
So you're looking, to my knowledge, at the first wildfire caused by an EV in the Northwest. So John McDonald with DNR, who's not here today, Johnny Mac had a couple of investigators up there. This is a BMW i3, very nice lady, as I understand it. I never met with her. I never even went to the scene. Just a side note, Sean and I, or Sean's going to probably get with the investigators, go back up there and take soil samples where this occurred just to see what the decon is, or the contamination is a year later. So the backstory on this is, one of the problems, as Mike talked about, is these battery packs are very low under these cars. Well, BMW i3 is probably less ground clearance than your average golf cart, right? But these motors have extremely high torque. So I don't know how many of you ever drove a Honda Civic back in the day, the front wheel drive. Man, those things are little mountain goats. You can really climb a lot of stuff. You got a lot of torque, got a lot of weight on those front wheels that can pull you up the hill. So this lady, very nice lady, she has this vehicle. They purchased a hilltop up near Republic, Washington, and they're driving. She is going up there to check her property. She hasn't been up there in a while. The Department of Natural Resources investigators were telling me they were having a hard time making it to the top of the hill in their F-150, but the BMW i3 is no problem. This little thing is just motoring up. So she's going up the road. Presumably she's hit a rock. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with our rocks out here. We have a lot of basalt, we have really hard rocks, and we have a lot of clay soil. And in the summer, when we're in peak wildfire condition, that clay turns to concrete, so it's very hard. So now we have a very low ground clearance vehicle on a unimproved, I don't know, logging road, basically would be an accurate description. And we have rocks that have just skittered down the road. So she says that she stops in the roadway and she gets out to move a rock out so she doesn't hit it with her vehicle. So I'm assuming that maybe she's already hit one. I don't know this. She's probably hit something. She drives up a little further. She says she starts to smell something weird. That's the only indication that something's abnormal. And we have a lot of wildfires going at this time, which is typical for our 5th season here in the Northwest, which is fire season. And she says, well, I smell this, but I don't think much about it. My car's still working. She gets in the car. She drives a little further up the road. She gets out. She goes up, moves a rock, turns around, and there's a flame jet at the back of the BMW i3 down at the base. And then this is what the fire investigators end up seeing. So I have tried to contact BMW multiple times to simply suggest to them and tell them that the state of Washington, despite my recommendation, is not going to sue you, because I think they would have probably cut a check right away to the state of Washington for the cost recovery, because there was absolutely nothing in the owner's manual of this vehicle that advises the owner that, hey, maybe driving this off-road is a bad idea, because you could damage that pan underneath the vehicle. And I like BMW, very well made cars. It's just something that needs to be in the owner's manual. But, you know, this is a thing. And I would also point out that, you know, this seems like an abnormal situation. Is Gerald here, Coeur d'Alene? No, he didn't make it. Gerald just had one of these a couple of weeks ago with an off-road mountain bike. That's a big thing now. They're making electric-powered mountain bikes. These things are going to be out in our woods. You know, they're taking a beating on these single-track trails if you're riding it right, or you're going places. So it's just going to be something we have to consider in the future. But that's all that's left. And like Mike said, and he helped on this. He talked to the investigators up there. You know, clearly, did this cause the fire? Yeah, I think we're pretty confident it did. What was the failure mechanism? Most likely mechanical damage, but we'll never know for sure because that's what's left.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that they have a lot of other information, like you suggested, with the occupant's interview and all that kind of stuff. But if you come across something like this and you say, yeah, it's the battery that caused this fire, you are kind of, you know, jumping to a conclusion without any kind of forensic evidence at that point. But they're considering additional information to identify this as the failure mode. And I also did a lot of research into BMW ownership manuals and stuff. I found nothing that says you shouldn't take an electric BMW off road. So, the owner's not at fault here, right? No, you're not. What's that? Oh, yeah. Yes, we have a question. Yeah, but I'm hoping the Wrangler has a little bit better ground clearance, better approach angles and things like that. So I know there's a Hummer EV now. That thing looks pretty awesome. I'm hoping GM will be willing to donate one to me so I can test out. I don't know. We'll see. But when somebody does something like this, this is not considered abnormal use, but it's probably on the borderline, right? Because I don't know if you should be driving up a road with an electric vehicle that you need to move rocks out of the way for. So consider that in your investigations. Let's take another break. We've been going for a while. Take 10, 15 minutes and let's meet back up and then we'll wrap up my part. Yep. I have to on the fly start doing some down shows. I tell people like, oh, what happened? I am stuff. I didn't hear about it. That was on fire. 17. Oh yeah, no, the top of the staircase. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. Yes. I certainly I was contributing back here after it was small. Yeah, that's actually what I talked about the hazmat battalion guy that was there. Loftus. And when he was talking about fire, fire battle, we did a bunch of design judgment. I think we did a lot of
Yeah, I think I was planning on, yeah.
Everybody back? We get everybody back from the break. All right, so these are just some quick slides on some of the firefighting considerations that have come up, and I think we've hit on a lot of these, so it's not going to take that long. But when we're talking about some of the things that are mentioned by lithium battery and EV manufacturers, one of the conversations that always comes up is what is the preferred extinguishing medium for an electric vehicle or a battery fire. As of right now, copious amounts of water is the preferred method. Not necessarily because copious amounts of water is effective in extinguishing a lithium battery fire that's developing its own oxidizer as it's breaking down and burning. So when you're trying to smother that fire and put it out in traditional means, it may not work. That being said, we talked about cell propagation, right? We're talking about an initial cell failure and this prolonged event continuing because neighboring cells are being compromised. So how do we prevent this fire from progressing and consuming more of the batteries? It's by cooling the adjacent cells. The problem with that scenario, whether it's an electric vehicle, whether it's even a battery pack, whether it's an energy storage wall, whatever it may be, how do you gain access to those adjacent cells? And that'll be mentioned a little bit, but that's the tough consideration. Other agents such as CO2, halon, dry chem, like it says there, they may actually suppress the actual fire that you're seeing. They may suppress the common combustible fires or other material fires that you're observing, but it's actually not doing anything to actually prevent that battery and the involved chemicals and chain reactions from continuing to occur. You're removing that heat element, which is hopefully preventing the next adjacent cell to go, and the way to best do that is by cooling it, and that's where we'll go back to the copious amounts of water. Those metal fire suppressants, we were talking about Purple K and stuff like that, and all these types of agents. Again, people have used these, but they haven't had effectiveness yet. So this is like an ongoing area of research. One of the guys that I was working with at the University of Texas, they're developing, he left to hopefully get into a startup which is developing some new chemicals that can be used for suppressing lithium-based battery fires. So maybe that'll be effective. Thermal runaway are preceded by a period of smoke, right? When we looked at that electric vehicle fire video, what did you see before there was actually a giant fire event? You saw the smoke ejection that was coming off. What did you see when we watched that video with the battery pack on the floor by the fireplace, I think it was, charging? You saw a lot of ejection of smoke. What did you see in the venting of the batteries when we induced failure during our tests? A lot of smoke, right? So in your interviews and in with your witnesses and your occupants, when you're trying to determine what happened in this scenario, they may end up describing, I heard a popping sound, I heard a hissing sound, which can be the release of those gases. I saw, a smoke cloud, and we'll talk about a scenario in which all these kind of things can help you determine what happened. If possible, shut the unit or system off, right? So first of all, obviously, as a firefighter or fire investigator, you come across energized scenarios, right, on structures a lot. As a firefighter, you may not have a choice during a life safety rescue to de-energize something or to isolate something. That being said, as a fire investigator, I'll tell you right now, I'm a forensic electrical engineer. There's no reason for you to be working and investigating an energized scene or component. You should be de-energizing it. That being said, effectively as a firefighter, if you come across a energy storage system which has batteries which are storing energy but may be also cross-connected either with line voltage or the grid or a solar array, you think you should isolate that to prevent further contributing factors in your suppression activities? 1,000%, if you can get access to that capability. When I'm isolating a scene for an investigation, a lot of times I get utility companies that come out and say, can't shut it off. The switches are burned up. I was like, well, we need to go back further upstream. Let's go to the pole. Can't get to the pole. The fuses are, inaccessible because it's in an area that's, being compromised by smoke and stuff like that. I guess where we're going back to now. You better go to your substation and shut down this line. Something's going to happen here. So stay in communication with your partners in order to do things like that. Apply water to neighboring battery enclosures. So Oftentimes, you know how these situations go in a firefighting situation, right? You may have a total loss at your item of fire, but protecting the exposure is key. That may be the best approach when you come to an electric installation with battery storage systems. You may have a battery that's burning, that's off-gassing volatile components. What do you think the best thing to do in that scenario is? If I extinguish the flaming part of something that's releasing combustible gas, and it's no longer combusting the gas that's coming out, but still releasing it, what am I doing? I am accumulating volumes of combustible gas. So maybe it's better to let that piloted flaming situation go on to burn everything that's coming off and then just protect your exposures and prevent propagation to adjacent cells. It's a tactical strategy for consideration, right? Enclosures should not be opened in such an event. So this goes back to that conversation. If I have a Tesla wall, if I have an energy storage vault, if I have an electric vehicle, it says there's recommendations not to open an enclosure. So how am I putting water on that pack itself? So now you might be in a scenario where it may be that you need to pull that vehicle away from your combustibles and let it burn out because you can't have safe, effective access to extinguish the fire. Protect your exposures at that point. Battery fire may continue for several hours and it may take 24 hours, blah, blah, blah. We talked about this, right? Electric vehicles, great scenario where you put the fire out because you've extinguished all of the combustible contents of the vehicle. The battery pack has maybe had one module that's consumed all of the available fuels in those cells in that module, and it started to preheat an adjacent module, but it hasn't necessarily caused it to fail yet. So you move that vehicle 24 hours later, as that slow migrating heating event has now had more time to break down the separator inside of a cell between the anode and cathode, and I get an internal short circuit that creates a nice heating event inside one of those cells, maybe I've rekindled internally and I wouldn't even know it's happening. And next thing you know, your EV fire is back and active again. So timeline considerations have to be taken into account. You should be willing to either yourself or advise responders that electric vehicle, electric installations need to be considered long-term suppression events in order to fully consider them extinguished. We all know you don't want to get that call back for the rekindle. Hoarding, we just had a fire in my town. It was, Collier's Mansions conditions, quarter. And we sat there for a long time flowing water on it because we don't want to get that call back a couple hours later. Same thing's going to happen with any of these electric installations, and you need to consider that. Yes.
The statement says allow battery pack fully consume itself and then cool it. That sounds better to me than pouring water.
Yeah, yeah.
Here when we're sitting, when we're talking, this book can't wrap around.
Yeah.
Do we have much research on what our firefighting fluid?
So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So part of our research right now that we're doing here as a part of the next couple of days where we're burning cells is not only the analysis of compounds in the air that are produced, but it's going to be in the water runoff as a result of suppression being used.
We may need to make a decision between damage to the air and damage to the drinking source.
There certainly needs to be a multi-agency discussion as to whether or not, if you let the thing burn, obviously you're going to be contributing contaminants, whether it's for runoff or even into the air. But it may be a tactical decision as to which one. I can't tell you which is going to be best, but certainly it's something that needs to be discussed. And there's research out there, initial research as to what the compounds are in the air that's being produced. There's initial research in some of the runoff, like I told you, some of the compounds that we measured when we were doing this stuff. But is there an analysis on if I burn 118,650, this is the concentration of this compound you find in the runoff? Not necessarily, but UL is working on things like that. We're working on stuff like that. Hopefully all the data comes together to provide a more definitive answer to that question. And that's part of the reason why we're here. All of this testing is to hopefully contribute data to that analysis. Yes?
Battery management systems, there are some that are able to detect when there is an event in the system.
Yeah, so battery management systems, like he was alluding to that we mentioned briefly, certainly can be used for a number of things. They can detect over temperature on a portion of a module or a cell in a pack. They can detect levels of charge to make sure everything is balanced so you're not overcharging one cell versus another cell being undercharged. They can detect incidences occurring. There's physical means of protection to prevent propagation within battery packs and cells. And if all of those things work together, we have a thermal event that's typically stopped in its tracks. However, we're not necessarily here to consider those events because we know that they occur, and we're talking about the after the fact. Now, what do we do? I wouldn't necessarily say that that's 100% effective. What I will say is that so when I have an electrical class, I'll teach you in a properly designed, operating, and maintained electrical system, it's very hard for it to cause a fire. Same thing can be said for a battery pack. So I was discussing this with one of the other investigators here. You have a tool that you're typically using in two different environments. One is your normal dry desert atmosphere. The same battery pack is being utilized in a coastal saltwater environment. Typical usage, you're not doing anything abnormal. Do you think the saltwater environment or even moist environment contributes to potential breakdown of that battery pack versus the other? Yeah. So the same electronics within hopefully do their job and prevent further charging of a cell that is now experiencing issues because some sort of circuitry has been compromised. But what if that event has already taken place and the circuitry for the BMS says, I'm cutting off power to this cell, and I'm cutting off this cell from the rest of the pack, but that cell has already begun to go and break down and go into thermal runaway. How do you physically stop that? You can't do that in a battery pack, and that's the scenario we're talking about. And that's ultimately what ends up causing fires that we come across, scenarios where thermal runaway can no longer be prevented by mechanical or electronic protection means otherwise. Tesla recommends for their Tesla walls that defensive firefighting tactics should be utilized for their energy storage systems. So they're saying, you're not trying to go in there and actively suppress a Tesla wall that's burning. You're going in there to be defensive. What does that mean? We're talking about exposure protection like we talked about. So take those things into consideration. And there's some more text about what we've talked about already. This is a decent case study. When we talked about lithium battery pack tools and stuff like that, some of the data we've utilized to help figure out if this could have been a contributing factor. This was in Puerto Rico. That one video that I showed, which had my hand with a couple 18650 cells, it's from this scene. I'm from New Jersey, interestingly enough. I don't know. I'll dramatically expose my pointer now that I finally whipped out. Carteret Fire Department. Anybody know where that is? Central New Jersey. It's funny because I showed up on this fire scene and they showed me these pictures. I'm like, Carteret, we've gone mutual aid to Carteret. That's interesting. Why is Carteret Fire Department here, in Puerto Rico? They had just sold their tower ladder to Puerto Rico, and this happened right after that, and they didn't even get a chance to re-letter anything, and it was put in service. So that was pretty funny. That being said, this is a truck, parts, warehouse, and maintenance facility. They work on cars, trucks, all that kind of stuff. They store parts. Big warehouse facility. Pretty big. This fire started in a bay in one corner of this building. And the fire department decided to extinguish the fire by opening up every possible roll-up door and helping ventilate it to stop the fire. And as you can see, it did a great job. But, that's a different discussion. Ventilation impact on fire progression and whatnot. There's the bay of origin where it started. How do we know that? It was closed for the day. This is around 5 p.m. It started to close. But people were closing up shop. They knew where this fire started, in this room. But they didn't know what caused it at the time. And because of the scale, the National Response Team was requested to help with the fire investigation, and I responded as a part of that team. Pulled out all the stuff. We imposed our traditional tactics. We conducted interviews. We looked at fire patterns. We looked at fire dynamics. At the time, arc mapping was considered a method of origin determination. But it's not right now. It's still in 921, even though they're trying to work hard to change things, but whatever. That being said, we arc mapped it to the front half of this bay. So we've now narrowed down to not only the bay, but the front half of the bay. During interviews, we're talking about what was going on in this bay at the time before you guys closed. That vehicle was being worked on this lift, and it was elevated. And underneath it, there were some carts with tools and parts. And that day, the two employees who had been working under there finished up for the day, put their battery-powered tools on top of the carts, closed up shop, left, and that was that. The witness, who was the receptionist, about halfway down the building in the front, not necessarily near this area of origin, said that she heard a large boom and then saw a fire that was elevated when they looked over to this area. So inside here, the partitions are all chain link fence, okay? So when they looked over, they could see through, but not necessarily every exact item. The fire was elevated in this area. It's like, that's interesting. What was on this chain link fence? During interviews, we identified that they're hanging, you've seen car part locations, belts, rubber hoses, plastic hoses, etc. That's what was located there. So we're looking at what's in the post-fire situation here. Obviously, we have this partially collapsed ramp. We have stuff underneath it. These green flags are 18650 lithium batteries that we identified. So we're like, that's interesting. Doesn't mean anything at this point, right? But you have to overlay this with what you know. I go and ask, like, what kind of battery packs are we talking about? And again, I will not name the manufacturer of the battery packs that were involved, but they had 2 powered sockets that were there. And I said, anything interesting happened with them? No, we use them like normal. My partner over here, though, I do remember he dropped one from working on the vehicle, held up around 6 feet up. I'm not 6 foot, but somebody that's tall, you get what we're saying. Dropped it onto the concrete surface. He used it for about half hour after that, and then he placed it on the tray. And the other partner was also using a similar tool. So now we have 2 tools that we can compare side by side in the same area of origin, right? So the one tool was intact, and we can identify how many cells we're supposed to have inside of it post-fire, because it's now been impinged upon by fire. Cells are still within it. Tool is not damaged. And again, they're within 2 feet of each other. These are the cells that have been ejected from the other one. So the first question I started asking is, why did 2 tools exposed to the same fire Originally, we're going to go conduct tests to determine whether or not the batteries found in the area of origin were the victim of the fire or contributed to the cause of the fire by taking those particular types of batteries, failing them internally, and taking a look at how they compare with the same battery exposed to fire. So take a fire torch, for example, propane burner, and expose it. Do that multiple different times and compare it from a directional failure that can be looked at on either side. So that's what's going to happen. On top of that, they mentioned we have some EV battery packs. We're going to talk about potentially burning those. And again, all this, while this is happening, real-time air monitoring is going to be done to collect data associated with the compounds that are being generated in the air. And we're also going to do water runoff monitoring for the actual runoff from the suppression-related water. One of the ways we're also going to evaluate the batteries that we fail, and understand in that scenario that we talked about, the sprinkler system did its job containing the fire. So we're not talking about a scenario where a battery is completely blasted, where it's completely burned. We're talking about a partially burned battery that's suppressed eventually. So we're going to try and wait for about 2 or 3 cell failures. Like so on those videos I showed you, like a cell pops, cell pops, cell pops. These batteries that we're using have 20 cells in them. So we're going to go about 3 or 4, extinguish the fire, and then we're going to evaluate some quenching techniques. So if I take a partially burned battery, which is something that FDNY will talk about, when they go to an EV fire, or not EV, mobility device fire, you got to mitigate what you're going to do with these, especially in a post-fire scenario. So they have various techniques. So one of the things we're going to do is, as a fire investigator, fire department, you come across a battery pack that's partially burned. If I dunk it in a bucket of water, is that good enough? If I dunk it in a bucket of water with some baking soda, is that good enough? Maybe if I use a different medium like mineral oil, which one is most effective at cooling the battery packs? So that's going to be evaluated on each evolution. Take the battery pack that's been extinguished, dunk it, quench it, and see which is the most effective. Do we get any rekindles? So sometimes those battery packs start to continue bubbling while submerged, and they continue to go off. Maybe we'll catch one of those. So while all this is going on and the other presenters are doing their thing, that will be what's being live streamed here on the video. So if somebody wants to specifically come out and watch stuff, they can. Obviously, like CTOD and the other safety guys were mentioning, we try to avoid that because of the contaminants that'll be coming off. There's no need to unnecessarily risk your respiratory health, I think, in this scenario. So everybody's going to be staying in here. There you go. Nobody's coming out. Yeah. So you'll be able to see everything up here. So that's pretty much the game plan, I think, for the rest of this week. That is everything that I have for you. If anybody has any questions, I can take them now, but I will be here for the remainder of the 3 days. We'll take another break, and I think the CST is going to go on at 11 and do their presentation for the overview of their program. Anybody got anything right now real quick they want to mention to the group? Any recent cases that they've had similar to this that they just want to talk about? Anything?
I got a quick question.
Yes, sir.
No, they chose not to because it was an accident, and I don't know. There's considerations we're not going to get into. There's politics that go with this as far as state government, federal government. There's people who are advocates for the technology. I don't want anyone in here to take anything away this week that says we're against the technology. The technology is awesome. The issues are we have a current technology that in its present form has created some unintended consequences that, quite frankly, everyone in here has a part of having to address and deal with. And so that's what we're trying to do is further that. I'll be honest, I thought the state would have probably recovered money because I'm not a lawsuit guy, and I might talk briefly about how this affects fire investigators a little bit later this week, or remind me, and I'll give you my theory on that. But at the end of the day, it's here. We have to deal with it. I do think it should be in the owner's manual for a BMW i3, and that's why I've been trying to reach out on my own to BMW and tell them, hey, tell your owner. The average person who owns that is probably, believe it or not, someone who reads the owner's manual. And maybe it's important for them to know that if they run over a retread on the interstate out here in downtown Spokane, that they should maybe not operate the vehicle until they take it to the dealership and have it inspected. Because the underside of these cars, like Mike said, are protected. I think Mike will also agree with me that they're very vulnerable to damage. And it may be damage similar to the toxicity issue. It might not be damage that presents itself right away. It may be damage that causes a fire a week, a month, or a year down the road because there's some kind of physical change or deprivation in that product. So no, they did not do cost recovery, and that's fine. And I even told BMW, hey, I just want to talk to somebody about maybe getting this in your owner's manual, and no one's suing me. And I got permission from the state attorney general's office to tell them no one's suing me over this fire. But that's what I mean by the public-private partnership that I think needs to take place, and why all of us need to get past our boundaries within our specific agencies and recognize that everyone in this room has a stakeholder involvement in this issue. So.
Anything else? All right, big break, and I guess.
Yeah, you can. What is it? So we're shipping these things out. They're on fucking line, dude. I mean, it's electronics in there. No, that's the people right now. This concept, I'm like, I got one of these over here for looking. Like, yeah, that's crazy. But is there any way to check for that? Because I think it could go for 5.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Well, you know what resident notice is, and then here's the notice. We have a lot of it. So if you grab it to the wall, set all the doors, utilize the heat for 60,000. Works great. We don't carry it, but I'm a school. We still have to sell it. The only thing you hope is that there's no
It's down.
twice. But here's the deal. We're screwed. We're looking at slides. We're going to go right through our skin, right into it. That's not very pleasant. So the biggest problem will be is these warehouses. The only way to maybe address that is one of the things we have to figure out how to That's going to be a concern, but it's too much. This is decent. Yeah, which is and that comes with the science. And I like the idea of
Test.
jump ahead.
So we're, I mean,
I'm glad you we're certainly which most of us because that technology was so now all of a sudden we're now homes are we had quite a bit of but I they compete with
and then he just. What do you look at what the slides are? Just so you know it's not right. And then you can.
an hour. This one's gonna kill. What version is that you? Oh, is that?
have to like replace them. Okay.
No, you're doing fine.
So anyway, but you know, it's like, here's the problem. I don't care what you need. You should have all the security. What we can do. We have to test it out. Yeah, we don't want that. I'm scared. We do have one. And then well, my buddy, about to I just need a better. Read out.
Well, I'd like to know the trust.
And then over time. No, I heard it. So, their start date. Yeah, that's a start.
Will you ask me after we're done and I'll call? Because I've emailed them multiple times now. And they're usually really good at using it.
It's not the holiday season yet. So they
I know they should be on leave.
Nobody's got a big.
How many attacks?
What's the ideas in that? So, where do you think your son's slavery?
I'll have a subject on it. All I do is I don't for a while, they're pretty good. I remember
All right, it looks like most people have made it back to their seats. We have the option of having like a half an hour long break because I thought that our team was presenting for 30 minutes, but Chow wasn't here till noon. so I'm going to talk really slow, bring up multiple guests. I'm Captain Beth Quinones. I'm the Deputy Commander for the 10th CST. Some of our other teammates are over here, and we have some additional reinforcements coming later this afternoon who will help with sampling later on. Our job really is hazmat response. We're supposed to be an element to help reinforce and help your teams out there. So how many times have you gone out to a scene and been like, well, that's new, or I haven't seen that before? How many teams have hazmat elements that maybe drill quarterly, don't get a chance to get their hands on their equipment that often, walk into scenes that are brand new that you've never seen before, and you're like, I mean, I could wing it, but I'd feel more comfortable if somebody else was providing some assistance or some subject matter expertise. Part of what we can do for your teams. So because we're the military, we have doctrine that tells us what our job is. To identify sea-burning agents, assess and project consequences, advise on response measures, and assist with appropriate requests and support. Really like to distill that, I see us as an element to assist federal and local law enforcement and first responder communities generally in hazmat response, because thankfully we don't have a need to respond to very many WMD incidents. We like graphs and things, flowcharts. Every state has a CST. There are 2 in New York, Florida, and California. So there's 57 teams nationally. We're all structured very similarly. There's 22 active National Guard members. So active duty, we're always here, we're always getting paid. We have 4 Air Force members on our team, Air Guard members, and 18 Army members. So we're a joint unit. And there are 6 primary components or elements, sections to our teams. We do a lot of different stuff. Since our whole job is to support you, we don't actually have a mission. So we're constantly training to keep ourselves as sharp as possible to be able to provide the maximum amount of support to our agency response partners. Everyone on our team is hazmat technician and hazmat operations certified. Everyone can operate in level A, B, or C. It would be really strange if the commander or I did that, but we could. That's what we're trained to do. We have a medical section, a decon section, an operations section, and then our downrange kind of operational team, our survey section. Again, because we're military, we fight everything. What we bring. So our operations section, tomorrow there's going to be an opportunity for our modeler, our operations NCOIC, to come out and talk about modeling. But on the bottom section is actually a model of this location here. If there is an event that we're asked to respond to, and it can be a telephonic assist, we don't have to come out. We don't need to like invade a space and force. We can provide a model or a plume model for whatever the hazard is, whether it's chemical, whether it's explosive, and we'll overlay that over a map to give you an idea of what school, major infrastructure, hospitals might be within a danger zone to help you or law enforcement figure out an evacuation zone or where you want to stay away from. We'll help to establish a hot, warm, and cold zone. And then we also have our operations truck. So this is the old version. We have a newer operations trailer, but it's a place where we can hold internal meetings with an incident command. We can put up the maps and the activity logs and whatever it is that we need to be able to communicate a common operating picture. Our survey section, that is our main hazmat team. They're the ones who get in suit and go down range with all sorts of various detection equipment. So we do have one of our survey trucks here today, and after all of the experiments wrap up or all the lectures wrap up, if anybody's interested, we'll have both of our analytical mobile laboratory outside along with a survey truck, so we can walk you through the specifics of the equipment and kind of how we manage all of the wires and cables and storage. Another thing that we do is kind of standby missions, So if there's an event, a large scale event, where you think that there might be an increased threat of some kind of terrorist activity or some kind of criminalistic threat, we can provide some services in that realm, we're not law enforcement. We do not respond armed. We can do air quality monitoring with things like area rays. We can do radiological monitoring to determine that there's not some kind of source in the area. So to, kind of get on the list for a standby mission, if you know that you've got an event coming up, or if you know you have a mission coming up, the earlier we know about it, the better we can be prepared to help you in response to it. I did mention we've got 22 members on our team. We don't usually roll out in force. We're all military, but when we show up kind of dressed down because nobody likes it when the Army just invades spaces. So you can kind of almost pick and choose a package of what it is capability-wise, or you contact us and we say, what we've got is these 3 people or this capability, and maybe that's really what you're looking for. So we can help identify what those packages might look like. We do have a decon section. It's primarily 2 personnel, generally 2 personnel. We're not intended for mass decon in some large-scale attack. Our decon element is for our team, but if we are responding with another agency and we do a downrange entry with somebody else, our decon team will help decon those people who are coming out. So it doesn't have to be only our people. We just don't have a large-scale capability to assist with mass decon. So the picture on the left-hand side is kind of the whole system setup. We do have tents we can put outside. We do have an emergency decon line for medical evacuation if something happens during a downrange entry. But typically what we use is more of a technical decon process, like on the right-hand side, where we'll do a spot decon or technical decon to safely doff a suit of whatever type and then dispose of it with hazmat. Communication. So unfortunately, neither of our communications personnel are here with us to talk about how much they love all of the communication here that we have. And I will not do it justice, but I will say we've got 3 primary pieces of equipment that our communications team uses. So we've got our unified command suite, the upper left-hand picture. It's a really large box truck. And in the back of it, there's 2 workstations, there's servers, there's radio, there's a SIPR room. So in the event of a WMD type incident, if we had to transmit on a secret network, we can do it from this truck. We also have cross-banding capabilities. So if we're responding with a number of different agencies and we don't have communications, we can help bridge that gap with this vehicle. And then it's got satellite communication. So the picture on the bottom left is our Advon vehicle, which is here. This is typically our command vehicle, and the weather blimp on the top is a satellite on the move capability. So as long as we make communication with the satellite before we leave, we'll have Wi-Fi and internet until we shut it off. It's pretty amazing. It also has limited cross-banding capabilities with various radio networks. It can project a Wi-Fi bubble. So if we're, again, in an area where there's limited communications or Wi-Fi or reception, this vehicle can assist with that. And then we've got our DSK, our Dismounted Strike Kit, which for battery burns, not so useful, but it is a remote communication satellite. So if we're in an area very, very low or forest fire, all communication has been knocked out, something like this can be in place to assist with projecting signal and radio communications for quite a distance. They would fire me for that. Okay. Medical. We've got a pretty robust medical section that is, again, our internal medical element. It's not to provide medical services for the general public. It's to make sure that our team and the response partners we are at an incident with are safe and cared for. So we have a PA. We've got a combat medic. We've got a medical operations officer who also happens to be a nurse. Not a requirement for the position, but a bonus for us. And then we've got our science officer who will get a chance to brief in a few minutes, Dr. Okoli, who is a PhD chemist. So the amount of knowledge on our team is really great when it comes to all things. But when it comes to addressing and assessing hazards and the effect on us and the ability to respond for us to respond safely is really phenomenal on the team. So all of their training is CBRN focused to make sure that whatever the threat is, they're able to help us respond. So again, they've got more of a detailed knowledge of, treatment options for the types of things that we might encounter than maybe a normal medic or PA would. And our medic and our PA both work at the ER at Madigan Army Medical Center just to keep their skills sharp and to maintain their credentials. Our mobile laboratory is outside our ALLs, so it's our analytical laboratory suite. And it's a phenomenally mobile full lab setup. So Dr. Okoli will talk about the equipment that's inside of that, but it's something we can take almost anywhere. I mean, we're not going to drive it on Republic's unimproved roads, but it is deployable. It can drive wherever it is that we need it to be. Sometimes we would do something, if we were responding to a location like downtown Spokane, we might bring it to a place like this, set it up so we could run it, and then bring samples back to that location so it's a little bit more secure. But it is an A2LA ISO certified laboratory. And I'm just not going to get into this. I'm going to pretend like it's not a thing because I will not do it justice. And Lieutenant Okoli, Dr. Okoli will come up and talk a little bit about the lab and also about the equipment that we're using today and how we're monitoring outside. You might want to check that. I don't know if it's on.
Radio check. Can you hear me? How about if I project?
Yeah,
that's
very well. It's still live streaming.
Hello.
There you go.
Okay, sweet. I typically like to project, but you bring up a pretty good point. But I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about laboratory stuff. I spent the better part of the last 2 decades working in a laboratory. So this is what I love to do, love talking about it, love getting in there and working. So after this, if you want to come and talk to me about laboratory stuff, I am so excited and so down for that. Previously, I worked at our state crime lab. So I got experience there in the toxicology lab, worked in research. So cancer research, different disease model research. So I have a gambit of a vast array of laboratory knowledge, instrumentation, sampling, and the like. So love learning about new instruments and equipment and how to best utilize it. So what is in our mobile suite? So you can see here we have multiple glove boxes. So these are class 3 glove boxes, pretty much a safe place that we can manipulate samples. So the types of samples that we deal with the range of CBRN material. So chem, bio, rad nuke, explosives, we deal with it. But in terms of chem and bio, we're able to work with it in these glove boxes. Let's say a white letter or a letter with a white powder in it, right? We can take it into a glove box, open it up, analyze it. So a safe place to work with really any material, because until you identify or detect the constituents in your unknown material, you should think worst case scenario, right? So unless you have the capability to go down range in level A SCBA Tyvek suit and manipulate the sample, you should come to us and we will do it for you and bring it here and identify it. But anyway, so we have glove boxes. This is exactly, so someone said it, but the GCMS, so gas chromatography mass spec, sorry. So we mainly have the chem and bio capabilities in our laboratory. So as it pertains to chem, we have this full-size laboratory GCMS. This is the gold standard, right? So if you send your samples to any fixed facility, federal lab, one of the instruments that they will run the sample on is this piece of instrumentation, the GCMS. And you guys have it at your fingertips through us. In addition to that, we have a portable GCMS. We'll talk through both of those after I kind of run you through all our capabilities, because we'll use these today. So we don't see it here, but we have a protein analysis platform. So particularly ricin and botulinum toxin, and a PCR platform. So that could detect 21, sorry?
I'm just curious about protein. So
Mm-hmm.
you actually have a library that detects what proteins that you're dealing with. So you could, let's say someone uses a white powder and it happens to be like flour or whatever. It'll be able to identify that protein, but in that your device has a library in there to say, hey, this is from this.
So this is works like ELISA. So we have like control standards and compare it to that, right? So we have different antibodies arrayed onto a surface, right? So yeah, okay, cool. So based on if you have, that specific protein that will bind to that antibody, you'll see some sort of fluorescence and able to detect whether you have that specific protein. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Sweet. So in addition to that, we have PCR. So we have the ability to detect 21 bio threat agents. So that is, we just got that platform, a new platform. It's incredible. So one panel, minutes of sample prep, put it in the oven, press play, and it will test your sample against those 21 agents. So super quick, super simple, and we've had quite a bit of success with that. Sweet. So today, what are we going to do, right? So as I said previously, we have two separate instrumentation, right? So we have the portable GC and the laboratory grade, bigger GC, as you see in this picture. And pros and cons, right? So that portable GC, it is, you saw a few over there. That's the G510, right? It was on that table. We have the HAPsite, both portable GCs. The benefits of that, primarily for these smaller semi-volatile compounds, right? So low boiling point, something that has a boiling point under 250 Celsius, typically under 12 carbons. So these very small compounds, it has a pretty good resolution within that specific mass range, versus something like this. It's able to do pretty much everything else. That's why it's so awesome. It has a huge range of compounds that it can detect. So putting both of those together, you're able to detect quite a bit of things. So looking at the specific compounds that we're interested in, just looking at the literature, there could be potentially hundreds of different compounds eluting coming off. But in particular, based on my discussions, a few compounds that you guys are interested in, hydrogen fluoride is a big one, right? So hydrogen fluoride, some of these metal oxides, and there's a handful of carbonates and other of these like hydrocarbons. So today, our sampling plan, we will have Tedler bags. So we'll sample the air with these Tedler bags. So it will collect the air into the sealed plastic container. And from there, we're able to put it into these portable GCs. And we'll do side-by-side comparison studies with the 510 and our HAPsite. So our portable GC, compare and contrast. So we have this gas sampling that we'll conduct. Also, we have this air sampler that will transfer the compounds into a dry filter unit. We'll also have different absorbent material like silica and activated charcoal that we'll also use. So fortunately today, we'll burn the commingled battery boxes. So it'll be a good test run, especially for tomorrow when we'll do Keeley studies, these controlled laboratory experiments. But yeah, so that's the sampling plan. Pretty much throw everything at it. So sample the gas into a sealed container, put it on the dry filter unit, utilizing multiple absorbent material, and put it on these chemical identification platforms, right? So the portable GC and this bigger laboratory grade GCMS. Sweet. So with that, any questions before I moonwalk away? Go ahead. Yeah, so
Like, so you have GC component,
at MS.
It's an
MS.
Mm-hmm. Is it a quadruple MS?
Yes, so it's
On
quadruple.
on that one,
Mm-hmm.
but on the portable.
It's also a quadruple.
So in a nutshell, the one break I'm looking at, it has a larger library than the portable one.
So it's the same library, right? It's the same like NIST library. That's where people kind of get in trouble, right? That they use the same library, right? You can just download it online, but you just need to know the capabilities of the different instrumentation and what it can and cannot detect. Yeah.
What side of the state and resources?
What side of the state are the resources?
Oh, yes. So we are in Camp Murray, so by JBLM, so on the west side of the mountains.
West goes in, what's the spend of time?
What?
Am I back on? So obviously we're not on the west side right now. If we were on the west side and we were in the office when we got a call and it was an emergency for us to get out the door, we're typically out the door in about 30 minutes. Our trucks are ready to roll at all times. We are on a recall status 24/7. So if a call came in the middle of the night or it was a weekend, we are all supposed to be back at the unit within an hour and would be on the road within an hour and a half to 2 hours typically.
Go ahead.
Those requests go into EMD then? I will talk
Through the request process, and they can go through EMD. I'll just jump into that now if you're done.
Just one question.
Go ahead.
Do you do
I'll get
anything with water runoff or is it primarily air?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention this, but yeah, we're also going to work with the water runoff also. So really, any type of matrix and material, we'll work with that. So I have quite a bit of experience in like complex matrices, typically blood and urine and things of that nature. So versus that, a lot of other things are pretty trivial. Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
So the tests that you're going to be doing with the activity that's happening here, are those results going to be available to us? How are we going to be able to get them, or are you going to share a report?
Definitely. So I've been working with Mike Abraham. So I will connect with him and we'll work out what's the best way to kind of push out all this information, but it will be pushed out. At this moment, I don't know in what particular format or form, but it will be published or disseminated.
The mobile laboratory is it like accredited, so thinking for ATF and we have you out there and run it through sampling, is it accredited?
Yeah.
Or will it be like on the spot and we'll send it to our lab?
Yeah, definitely. So it's externally accredited. So this is the ISO 17025 accredited laboratory. So we do not do so we don't do quantitation. So we're purely a qualitative lab. So this is one of the questions that we get all the time. Like, oh, can you quant this? Can you quant this semi-quant or something of that nature? We do not offer that. We are, obviously familiar with the process. There's a lot of labs that do it, but we are just not set up to do it, and that's not our scope of work. So we don't perform it. Go ahead.
Able to have like just some preliminary data while we're here this week, or will that come out later?
That's a good question, right? There's just a lot going through my head, a lot of different possibilities. But yes, ideally, we would get some sort of preliminary data. I'm just very hesitant on pushing information out that is not thoroughly thought out. Yeah, so I would love
part of the CST training, by position, there are mandatory requirements. There are individual training requirements to make sure that each section is proficient in whatever it is their job category is. So my training is different from Okoli's training, which is different from a survey team member's training. But we also do collective training exercises within our team. Every year we train on explosives, we train on chemical warfare agents, biological warfare agents, pharmaceutical-based agents. So we contract training, and we do, a week-long training event. When we do those trainings, we typically invite agency response partners with us to participate in that training. So, provides an opportunity for really good training, but also the important thing for our team is that we have a relationship with our response partners. So when we show up, you know what it is that we do, and you've got an expectation of how we will operate. And we know what it is that you want us to do, because if we're responding with West Pierce and their hazmat team, it's going to be different than Seattle Fire Department, or it's going to be different than State Patrol. And so if we train with all of those people frequently, we get a chance to know everybody by name, know how everybody's going to react, and what capabilities we're all bringing to the team. We also do joint CST things. That's good relationships for us. And in the event that we are low staffed because we've got a bunch of people who are out at training, we can request backfills from other states to fill those key capabilities, so that you as kind of a customer still know that you're getting the full capabilities from our teams. In red, I don't really know why it's in red. It's my slide, I should know, but it was just a different color. In red are different missions that we've done in the last year. I stopped keeping track in July, so there's probably 2 others that I should add on there. But the point in putting this up here is just to kind of demonstrate that we respond in different regions and we respond with different people every time that we do it. And the more people we get a chance to sit down in front of and talk to, the more, our community grows, and the more assistance we're able to offer to you. Because again, we literally have nothing to do unless somebody's calling us and asking us for advice or to come out to a scene. Venue protection, little in green because colors. Typically close to home, but again, we just talked with somebody who was doing a mountain biking festival that had grown in the last couple of years from a couple hundred people to multiple thousand people. If you've got an event in your region that you've got some concern about, at least call us and let us know. If you don't want us to be there, that's totally cool too. We have comfy chairs. Which one? We were there to augment their hazmat and extraction team for the Secret Service. So we had vehicles in the motorcade, and at each venue event that he was at, we were there. So we were downtown Seattle and moving to wherever his locations were. But we knew about it 2 days in advance, so it was a scramble to get everybody. Some of the things we do, so big plug for Department of Ecology. We were out in the house in Yelm. A resident had passed away of natural causes. He happened to be an explosives enthusiast. So when his son went to clean up his house, he walked into the garage and was like, I'm not touching any of this stuff. Had no idea what it was. The gentleman actually did label some of his things, but it was not entirely clear, and some of it was really old. And so we worked with Ecology, ATF, FBI, and the Thurston County Sheriff's Office to just do HazCat, disposal. He had a blast pit area because he liked to blow stuff up. So we blew some of it up right there in his yard. And Cairo was there for us. We also got to exercise our driver's training because we got one of our vehicles stuck in the mud. But that was a fun day. Another kind of completely different scenario. I don't know if you heard about it because it was kind of quiet at the time. But in 2019, Harborview was decommissioning a blood irradiator, and the contractor that was in charge of it had breached the source container for cesium-137. So the bottom left picture is a picture of that container that was breached. So they had biological sensors on them that started tripping, or in the container that started pinging, and they just figured their equipment was not working right, and so they ignored it. So eventually Seattle Fire got the call. We got called in. We worked with Department of Health and worked on the decontamination line. So we had a decon team there. We also did radiological monitoring. So that whole site was closed down for 2 years and then it for reoccupation in May of 2021. No, sorry, 2021. But that was the building, Harborview Medical Center training facility on the bottom right. Downtown Pill Hill, if you're familiar with it, on Capitol Hill, like right in the middle of a residential and medical complex. So we can get called out for all sorts of things. Don't be afraid to call. Points of contact. So currently, Colonel Wes Watson is over here. He is our outgoing commander. He's really, really upset about it. So you can still call him and he'll probably still take your call and say he'll be right there, but it won't be his job anymore. Lieutenant Colonel Tyler Royster is our incoming commander. He's in the opposite corner. They do like each other, I promise. I'm Beth Quinones. Our first will be here later today, and our OPSO is down there. That QR code, we're not familiar with these things. We don't know how it works. We'll give you Colonel Watson's phone number. So all of our phones are on us 24/7, and they pass to the next person who takes the position. So I don't get to keep my cool government phone. Not sad. When I leave, I will be sad. But that'll give you the commander's number and also the state EMD website to the CST, which hopefully next week we will have all of our phone numbers listed on. So you can just go to the website that comes up when you scan the QR code and get all of our contact info. Or EMD, that's an absolutely fine way. It just is not as quick. And that concludes everything that I have. Does anybody have any questions in general about the CST? And if you have specific survey equipment questions or lab capability questions, like I said, after the lectures are done in here today, we've got our survey vehicle and our alls outside. So the SMEs for those pieces of equipment can walk you through what they look like, how we use them, how often we use them. They would be to talk about their gear. All right, thank you guys.
I'm gonna go ahead and fill the time real quick. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. All right. So we invited, I think Quinn's here, wave. So this actually came from Sunshine Recycling. We have to give them back. So talking about the disposed batteries or the way these are being handled at the household waste facilities. They purchased this box for $60. That's what it costs. Your recycling facility is probably doing something similar. Maybe not necessarily with this company. How diverse is this? Is there a lot of you guys know? I mean, are there a lot of different companies or just others? So this particular one's called Call to Recycle. So if you want to know what happens to these batteries, we're going to do a show and tell table out there. And this is no knock on Quinn or any of the other folks at the waste transfer stations. They have to take this stuff with household waste. They have no choice. Your Batteries Plus store, how many of you guys have ever flipped a battery at Batteries Plus? So they take their old battery, right? Well, unbeknownst to me, the employees are supposed to tape it up so that they cover the contacts, and then they throw it in a cardboard box in the storeroom with all the new batteries. So you have a big cardboard box at the Batteries Plus that can have as many as 100 pounds of batteries. They didn't tell me this directly. Quinn, I don't know if you know, but like all the cell phone shops, they don't pay to get rid of it. Quinn pays to get rid of it. His company pays to get rid of it. They just bring it to the household waste and they drop it off. So if there's an interruption, which I think Quinn is having currently, you can end up with 6 or 7 pallets of these boxes. So this box is supposed to hold up to 50 pounds. This is a big one. We've got one here that's open. We'll lay the batteries out up here on a table. You're welcome to look at it during lunch, after lunch. These are all assorted batteries. Some of the guys just put the lithium ions in and maybe the nickel metal hydride, your tool batteries. Some of them put the alkaline batteries in. There's hearing aid batteries. The cell phone shops are bringing all the little swollen, puffed up batteries that they're replacing out of the cell phones. I mean, it's really kind of a mess, honestly. And they're supposed to wrap these things up. They're supposed to put them in the plastic bag, and then they ship them in this. They pay FedEx Ground $200 a box, up to 50 pounds. So you can do the math. If you got 5,000 pounds of these that accumulated and you're a waste transfer station, it's a lot of money. These things are on FedEx trucks going through your jurisdiction. Next time you see a FedEx truck fire, you can probably go, I wonder, because maybe it's these. There's been some sort of disruption in the system. He's not been able to ship these things for 3 months, and that's why they have such a large accumulation. They don't want these on site, trust me. Every place we've talked to, they want to package them, they want to get rid of them as soon as they can. This is why it's vital that you reach out to your waste transfer stations in your jurisdiction, be familiar with what they have. I would make a suggestion, I'm not a codes guy, but maybe work with them to try and move these away from the other household wastes, the paints, the household chemicals, the used motor oil, and all the rest of it, if possible. May not always be possible. I know Sunshine Recycling, who's gonna, are they here? Anyone? Okay, they're coming out to watch Thursday, I think. They have, they put this stuff in their hazmat locker, right? Sean, jump in if I'm missing something important. So they get them and they try to ship once a week. So they're shipping anywhere from, I think he told me, 5 to a dozen boxes per week. Keep in mind, that's one transfer point in Spokane County. I don't even want to think what King County looks like.
Do you know of any of them that are using materials like cell block or anything like
Yeah,
that?
I was going to get to that. So Sean is going to go out and pick up, so we have a waste to energy facility here, which is an incinerator that's actually in the city. So this is Spokane Fire's problem. They have a pretty good, at least they're trying to do, I think, more. And they come up with, they're using 50-gallon metal drums that are supposed to be full of cell block. Cell block's a material that if one of these goes into thermal runaway, it's supposed to expand and maybe protect the other batteries. If nothing else, it's going to slow the fire development, and it's possible that we may just burn one of those barrels, so you'll have a chance to see that and evaluate for yourself how you think it works. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't, I mean.
You guys might know.
Yeah, we can, cell block is intended to encapsulate the battery, and it also has an absorption. It absorbs gases, so it helps to eliminate some of what might be emitted from that package. The key to it is, though, the package has to be able to withstand enough heat for it to actually activate. We have, in our regulations, we're all the Department of Transportation, my plan has that same area. We write regulations for transportation. There's packaging out there that cell block can be used in where the packaging will melt before the cell block goes. So.
I mean, but they're doing something, at least they're doing something to maybe actively mitigate it, and maybe it makes it easier for the Spokane Fire Department if they get called out there, one of the drums catches fire.
Yeah.
I think we'll all agree, maybe after we see the testing, that it's probably better than the cardboard box plan with the fire. So how this works is they open it, they're supposed to put up to 50 pounds in it. I'll put the directions up here. Don't get rid of the box. I have to get this back to Sunshine Recycling, or I have to pay $60. And this has like a liner in it, has a plastic bag that comes with a label, ready for FedEx Ground pickup, and it's listed as universal waste. So
when FedEx picks it up, where does it go?
So from here in Spokane, this company right here, Call to Recycle, is located there. Collection point is in Mesa, Arizona. So these are shipped all the way. We'll do a show and tell table out in the field house. I'm not comfortable bringing some of the batteries in here. And we'll let you see some of what's going into these boxes. And they're being transported all the way to Mesa, Arizona. I talked to the fire marshal down there. It sounds like the company has a special occupancy permit at their receiving place. So they've got like a deluge sprinkler system. And they sort the batteries there, so they separate the alkalines, the lithium ion, the nickel metal hydrides, and then from there they go various places within the recovery or recycling stream, or they go to some warehouse in Morris, Illinois, and they sit there, and then the guys go bankrupt. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing with it. I just thought it was very interesting. I would very much encourage you to go back, do this in your jurisdiction, talk to your neighboring jurisdictions that aren't here, and just say, hey, identify these. And I don't want to put Clint on the spot, but I'll tell you right now, he is more eager than anybody in here to learn about this because no one's telling them squat either. And they recognize that it's a threat. And I think he'll tell you if you want to talk to him offline. Almost all their fires up there involve lithium-ion batteries. Not these so much as people are just discarding them in the trash. They put the front end loader into the pile, load it into the trucks or move it, and they get a fire. And they actually do pretty good fire investigations, maybe better than some of us in the room do. And they dig it out of the pile, and almost every time they find a lithium-ion battery that's been damaged. So these are just things to be aware of and know about. So that, I think, has taken us to lunch. Rex, you want to give any words of guidance? Or we'll put these up here and we'll unpack this other box just so you can look at it and see what it looks
On a
like.
side note, one of the vehicle batteries that we're going to be burning up here in this training actually came from their facility. Because someone kind of got at the bottom of the Prius, part of the frame, and they dropped it off. So it happens as well. So it's definitely, like Todd said, it's worthwhile to have those conversations with those folks in your jurisdiction, just to be partners and communicate what's going on with that.
Well, thanks to all the presenters this morning. That was super valuable, detailed information that is a good start for us to start planning and coupled with the data that we get from the experiments, outline maybe changes in our response plan in regard to these batteries. So much thanks to everyone who spoke this morning. Pizza is not quite here yet. It's going to come in 2 different deliveries, 15 pizzas a shot. And so we'll go ahead and set those aside outside. If you guys just want to talk amongst yourselves, we'll let you know when the pizza's here, and then you guys could go at it. For those that are watching online, we'll be back in approximately an hour. All right.